Welcome to Reddit's For Sleep, where every story is your escape into calm. If this video helps you relax or drift off tonight, gently tap that like button so we can keep making more just like this. And if you haven't already, subscribe and let us tuck you in with a fresh hour of stories every single night. Story 1: The Last Thanksgiving at my mother-in-law's. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who cuts ties with family. I was raised believing family is everything, and you weather storms together, no matter how bad they get. But this past Thanksgiving broke me in a way I didn't think was possible. My husband Ethan and I have been married for 7 years. He's my safe place, my calm in the chaos. But his mother, Janice, has always been challenging. She's the kind of woman who can turn a compliment into a backhanded insult, who weaponizes her fragility, and who believes every slight, real or imagined, is a deliberate act of war. For years, I tried to get along with her. I really did. I baked her favorite pies, asked for her advice on houseplants, even though I didn't need it, and let her reorganize our kitchen cabinets every time she visited. Ethan, bless his heart, would squeeze my hand and whisper, "It's easier to let her think she's in charge." But last Thanksgiving, something snapped in me. We had agreed to host Thanksgiving dinner at our house that year. Our daughter Harper is 4 now and old enough to start forming memories. I wanted her to remember warmth and laughter, the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon, not hushed arguments and passive-aggressive comments. Ethan and I spent 2 days prepping. The table was set beautifully, with little pinecone name cards and flickering candles. Harper helped me arrange the cranberry sauce in a crystal dish, her tiny fingers sticky with sugar. For once, I felt ready, hopeful even. Then Janice arrived. She walked in wearing her usual Chanel No. 5 perfume that clung to the air like a thick fog. Behind her trailed Ethan's younger brother, Mark, and his fiancée, Lila, sweet girl, but visibly nervous. Janice gave Harper a cursory pat on the head before zeroing in on me. "Wow," she said, surveying the dining room. "You've tried, haven't you? I mean, it's no Martha Stewart, but I suppose it'll do." I forced a smile. "Thanks, Janice. Make yourself comfortable." As the hours ticked by, she picked at everything. The turkey was a little dry. The stuffing tasted store-bought. She wrinkled her nose at my pumpkin pie. "Too much nutmeg, dear. Did you follow an actual recipe or just wing it like last year?" I swallowed her criticisms, focusing on Harper's giggles and Ethan's warm hand on my knee. But then Janice turned her attention to Lila. "Mark told me you work in graphic design," she said sweetly. "That's cute. But, if you want to be a real wife someday, maybe focus less on career and more on building a family. Women aren't getting younger, sweetheart." Lila's face crumpled. She excused herself to the bathroom, and I could hear her soft sniffling through the thin walls. That's when I decided. After dessert, as Janice sipped her decaf coffee and Harper colored quietly in the corner, I stood up. My heart was pounding, but my voice came out calm. So calm, it surprised even me. "Janice," I said, "I need to say something." She raised an eyebrow. "Yes?" "You're not welcome in our home anymore. I've tried for years to make this work. I've put up with your comments, your little jabs, because I wanted Harper to have a relationship with her grandmother, but not like this. Not if it means she grows up thinking this is normal." The room went still. Janice opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. "I'm not asking for an apology. I'm not asking for change. I'm telling you, this ends here. You can see Harper if and when you're able to treat people with kindness. Until then, please leave." Janice sputtered. "Ethan, are you going to let her talk to me like this?" Ethan took my hand. His jaw was tight, but his voice was steady. Mom, you need to go. And for the first time in my life, I watched Janice speechless. She stood abruptly, muttering something about ungrateful children, and stormed out, Mark trailing awkwardly behind her. Lila mouthed thank you as they left. The house felt impossibly quiet after the door shut. I sank into Ethan's arms, and we just sat there, listening to the faint hum of the dishwasher. I don't know what the future holds. Janice will probably never forgive me. The holidays might never look the same again. But as Harper climbed into my lap, her tiny arms wrapping around my neck, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. Story 2. The apartment inheritance. The first time I met Mrs. Ellison, she was standing in the hallway outside apartment 3B, clutching a grocery bag like it was her lifeline. I was moving in that day, boxes stacked high on a dolly, my cat meowing softly from his carrier, and she gave me a polite nod as I passed. Her silver hair was tied back neatly, her cardigan buttoned all the way up, but her eyes looked heavy. New here? She asked gently. Yeah, just signed the lease for 3C. Welcome, I'm Marjorie. If you need sugar or a spare light bulb, you know where to find me. Her voice carried the kind of warmth you only hear in old movies. I liked her instantly. Over the next few months, Marjorie and I became friends. She was in her 70s, widowed for nearly a decade, and had lived in 3B for almost 40 years. She spoke often about her children, Andrew, a paramedic in Boston, and Julia, a stay-at-home mom in Portland. They don't visit as often as they used to, she said one evening as we sipped tea in her living room, but I suppose they're busy. Life happens, doesn't it? There was a sadness in her smile. I started stopping by more often after that, watering her plants when she had trouble with her hip, helping her reset the TV remote, bringing muffins from the bakery down the street. Claire, you're the daughter I wish I had nearby, she told me once. You have Julia, I reminded her gently. Her eyes flickered. Julia means well, but she doesn't understand me anymore. One evening, I noticed Marjorie's light wasn't on. She always kept her living room lamp glowing at night. It was like a little beacon in the otherwise dim hallway. But that evening, darkness pooled in apartment 3B. The next morning, her newspaper still sat untouched on the welcome mat. I knocked. No answer. My stomach knotted as I went to get the building manager. The paramedics arrived soon after. She was in her favorite recliner, hands folded neatly in her lap, as though she'd been waiting for someone. She passed peacefully, one of them murmured. I nodded, tears blurring my vision. On the coffee table were 2 mugs of tea, one for her and one for me. Julia arrived a few days later to sort through her mother's belongings. She swept into the apartment with a designer handbag, her phone pressed to her ear, barking orders at someone on the other end. She barely kept this place up, she muttered as she walked through the rooms. And that smell. I stood awkwardly in the doorway, watching her toss photo albums into cardboard boxes like they were junk mail. She spoke about you a lot, I offered gently. Julia glanced at me, her mouth curling slightly. Oh, you're the neighbor? Right. Mom mentioned some girl she was so grateful for. Julia rolled her eyes. Always so dramatic. I bit my tongue. The fight started 2 days later. Apparently Marjorie had left the apartment to Andrew in her will, not Julia. Julia stood in the hallway, screaming into her phone. Can you believe this? That place should have been mine. I've spent years putting up with her guilt trips, and for what? She leaves it to Andrew? He doesn't even need it. She hung up and turned to me. You were her little pet project, weren't you? I bet you encouraged her to do this. My chest tightened. Marjorie made her own decisions. She wanted peace for her kids, not more fights. Julia scoffed. Peace? Please. She's caused nothing but drama, even from the grave. In the weeks after Julia left, the building felt quieter than ever. Andrew came to collect his mother's belongings. He moved slowly, carefully, as though each object carried her spirit. "She really loved you," he said softly as we packed the last box. "Thank you for being there when we weren't." "She deserved more visits from her family," I said before I could stop myself. Andrew nodded, his eyes misty. "You're right. We failed her. Now, every evening, I keep a lamp on by my window. It's a small gesture, but maybe, just maybe, someone walking by will see it and remember to call their mother before it's too late." Story 3. My husband's best friend told me the truth. I always thought my marriage was solid. Sure, Daniel and I had our rough patches like any couple. Between his long hours at the firm and my freelancing from home, it sometimes felt like we were living parallel lives. But at the end of the day, we laughed together. We shared takeout. On the couch, we curled into each other at night like spoons in a drawer. Or at least I thought we did. It started with small things. Missed calls, texts left unread for hours. "Work's been insane," Daniel said one night as he loosened his tie. "We've got this new client, and everyone's burning the midnight oil." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But something in his tone felt off. That weekend, he flew to Chicago for what he said was a networking retreat. He sent me photos of the hotel conference room, of sleek glass towers lit against the night sky. And yet, a quiet voice in my head whispered that he hadn't gone alone. I didn't want to be that wife, the suspicious, snooping, paranoid one. So I did nothing. Until Brian showed up at my door. Brian was Daniel's best friend. They'd been inseparable since college, sharing dorm rooms, road trips, bad tattoos on their ankles. I liked Brian. He was warm and funny, the kind of guy who'd show up with coffee when your world was falling apart. But that morning, his face was pale. "Can we talk?" he asked softly. I stepped aside, heart pounding. We sat at the kitchen table. The sunlight streaming through the blinds felt harsh, almost accusatory. "Claire," he began, "I don't know how to say this." "Say what?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. He ran a hand through his hair. I didn't want to get involved. "But I can't keep watching you live like this." I gripped my coffee mug so tightly my knuckles whitened. "Daniel's been seeing someone," Brian said finally, "a paralegal at his firm. It's been going on for months." I didn't cry. Not at first. I sat very still, staring at the faint scratches on the wooden table. "You're sure?" I whispered. Brian nodded. I caught them together. He doesn't know I know. But I couldn't stay quiet anymore. "You deserve better, Claire." That night, I waited for Daniel to come home. When he walked through the door, he looked tired, his suit jacket slung over his arm, his tie askew. "Hey," he said, leaning in to kiss me. I flinched back. "Claire? Who is she?" His face went slack. "What are you talking about?" I met his gaze, evenly. "The paralegal, the one you've been spending all those late nights with." For a moment I thought he'd deny it, that he'd spin some elaborate story about how Brian was mistaken, or lying, or trying to sabotage him. But instead, he sank into the nearest chair and buried his face in his hands. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The next few days passed in a blur. Daniel stayed with a friend while I packed a small bag and drove to my sister's house in Vermont. I needed space to breathe, to think, to decide whether forgiveness was even possible. At night, I lay awake listening to the soft creak of the old farmhouse settling. Could I ever trust him again? Could I stitch the fabric of our marriage back together after such a deep tear? Brian texted once, asking if I was okay. I stared at the screen for a long time before typing. Thank you for telling me. You saved me from living a lie. It's been 3 months now. Daniel and I talk sometimes, carefully, like two people standing on opposite sides of a glass wall. He says he's sorry, that it was a mistake, that he wants to come home. But I don't know if I want him to. I've started to remember what it feels like to choose myself, to sit in quiet and feel whole. And for the first time in years, I'm starting to believe I deserve that. Story 4. I haven't spoken to my father in 12 years, and he's dying. I found out yesterday that my father has stage 4 lung cancer. The news came like a cold wave, knocking the breath out of me. My younger brother, Josh, called me out of the blue. I almost didn't answer. Family calls had become something I dreaded, always heavy, always complicated. But that day, something inside whispered, "Pick up. Claire." Josh's voice cracked on the other end. "Dad's sick. They say it's bad." I closed my eyes and sank into the couch. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. Not yet. It's been 12 years since I last spoke to my father. 12 years since I walked away and slammed the door on the past. I still remember that Thanksgiving evening like it was yesterday. The house smelled like roasted turkey and cinnamon candles, the kind of cozy scent you'd expect from a family gathering. But beneath the warmth, tension twisted tight like a rope ready to snap. Dad was drinking whiskey from a glass he'd held too long, the ice cubes melting slow and steady. His eyes were bloodshot and hard. "He's a loser?" Dad spat, jerking his thumb toward my boyfriend, Mark. Mark was sitting quietly, trying to ignore the venom in the room, but I could see the tension in his jaw. "He's not a loser," I said, voice shaking but firm. "He's working hard to get his art degree." Dad laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. It was cold and sharp, like a knife scraping a chalkboard. "You always think you know better," he said, "just like your mother." Those words hit me harder than I expected. My mother had left us years ago, left him, left me, left everything behind in a cloud of silence and bitterness. I'd stood there trembling, the weight of his words crushing me. "Maybe I do," I whispered back. "And maybe that's why she left you." The silence that followed was unbearable. I grabbed my coat and walked out into the cold November night, the crisp air biting at my cheeks. That was the last time I saw him. The years that followed were a mixture of healing and forgetting. I buried myself in college, then work, then the slow building of a life far away from the shadows of that house. Mark and I moved across the country, a small, old farmhouse surrounded by pine trees and the kind of silence that feels like home. We married quietly, without fanfare, adopted a golden retriever named Jasper, painted the peeling shutters navy blue. We built a life full of small joys and soft routines. But the past has a way of catching up. Sometimes a song would come on the radio, one of those old Motown tracks Dad used to play while working on his car. The sound would press against my chest, a sudden sharp ache. I'd pull the car over, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Because no matter how far I ran, no matter how loudly I told myself I was done with him, he was still my father. When Josh called me yesterday, the world stopped. "Dad keeps asking for you," he said quietly. And just like that, all the years of silence, anger, and hurt flooded back in. I'm lying awake now, staring at the ceiling. My husband is asleep beside me, his hand resting gently on my arm. I want to talk to someone. but the words stick in my throat. I'm scared of what I'll say if I see him, scared of what I won't say, scared of feeling the same old pain all over again. I keep thinking about the moments I missed. The birthdays uncelebrated, the calls unanswered, the apologies never made. I wonder if he's changed, if he regrets the things he said, the way he pushed me away. I wonder if he remembers the little girl who used to sit on his lap, listening to him hum old tunes in the garage. The truth is, I don't know if I'm ready to forgive him. Not yet. But I also don't know if I'm strong enough to watch him go without ever saying goodbye. I'm haunted by the idea of walking into that sterile hospital room and seeing him so small, so fragile, hooked up to machines that beep and hiss. Will he recognize me? Will he remember the daughter he lost? The nights are the hardest. When the world is quiet, and the only sound is the slow, steady breathing of the man I love beside me, I reach for my phone and stare at the screen. I want to book a flight home. I want to tell him everything I never said. I want to heal, but I'm terrified. Maybe tomorrow I'll call Josh back. Maybe tomorrow I'll start to make peace with the past. Maybe tomorrow I'll find the courage to be the daughter he needs, if only for a little while. Until then, I'll hold on to the hope that it's not too late. That love can be messy, complicated, and painful, but still, somehow, enough. Story 5. The small acts that saved our family. I never thought the little things could hold so much power. We were just an ordinary family, me, my husband Ryan, and our 2 kids, Lily and Max. Our lives were a swirl of busy mornings, school drop-offs, work emails, and dinners where everyone seemed to talk past each other. Ryan worked long shifts at the hospital, sometimes pulling double days. I worked from home as a freelance writer, juggling deadlines with snack breaks and school pickups. At first, it was manageable. We both understood the stress and exhaustion, but over time, the distance between us grew, not in miles, but in moments missed, words left unsaid, and feelings ignored. It started subtly. Ryan would come home, exhausted, sit silently on the couch, scrolling through his phone. I'd be at my laptop, headphones in, pretending to concentrate, but really distracted by the silence between us. The kids noticed too. Lily, our quiet and creative 9-year-old, retreated into her books and art. Max, 7, and usually full of boundless energy, started having outbursts, crying at minor frustrations, pushing boundaries at school. One evening, after a tense dinner where Ryan and I barely spoke beyond coordinating who'd clean up, I found myself stepping outside onto the porch. The summer night was warm and still, the hum of cicadas filling the air. I sank into the rocking chair, the wood creaking softly beneath me. Ryan joined me moments later, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He sat beside me without a word, the silence between us now comforting rather than cold. After a while, he spoke softly. "We need to fix this." Those words felt like a fragile bridge stretching between us. The next morning, Ryan surprised me. I found a note stuck to my laptop. "Coffee's on me today. Love you." It was such a simple gesture, but it cracked the walls I'd built around myself. I smiled for the first time in weeks. That day, when he brought me a cup of coffee, steaming and perfect, I felt seen. We decided to start small. No grand plans or expensive getaways. Just little things that said, "I'm here. I'm with you." Ryan made a point to learn about Lily's quiet passions. He discovered she loved drawing and listening to jazz, a world apart from her usual routine of school and chores. He started leaving her little notes on her desk, encouraging her to take time for herself. "Your art is beautiful," one note read. Lily would beam when she found them, a quiet light shining behind her eyes. I did the same for Max. His favorite snacks, a peanut butter sandwich cut into stars, a handful of grapes, became part of his school lunch, along with notes scribbled in my messy handwriting. "You've got this, buddy. Keep being awesome." Sometimes he'd bring home the notes, folded carefully and tucked inside his backpack. Saturdays became our sacred time. We'd gather in the kitchen for pancakes, the syrup dripping down the sides and sticky fingers reaching for more. We told stories, funny, silly, sometimes just quiet moments of laughter. Ryan would sit on the floor at bedtime, reading Where the Wild Things Are to Max, who'd sit cross-legged, eyes wide, and mesmerized. The sound of Ryan's voice reading aloud filled the house, a gentle rhythm that wrapped around us like a warm blanket. It wasn't perfect. There were still days when the weight of work and worry pressed down on us, days when tempers flared or exhaustion made us snap. But the difference was the intention behind it all. We chose to notice each other, to speak kindness even when tired, to hold space for one another's struggles. I started noticing Ryan again, not just as the tired husband, but as the man who held my hand during late-night storms, who danced barefoot in the kitchen with the kids, who made me laugh when I forgot how. And Ryan saw me too, the woman balancing so much, doing her best every day, quietly hoping to be loved in return. The kids changed. Lily's art blossomed. She started painting little gardens filled with magical creatures and colors that seemed to glow. Her teacher told me she'd become more engaged, more confident. Max's tantrums softened. He started making friends at school and told me he was excited for his soccer practice. One afternoon, Ryan surprised me with tickets to a jazz concert. "It's your favorite," he said, grinning. We sat close together, hands entwined, letting the music carry us away. In that moment, surrounded by warmth and sound, I realized something important. Love isn't just the big moments, it's the small ones. The notes left on laptops, the extra 5 minutes spent reading a story, the shared smiles over breakfast. Those little acts saved our family. And they can save yours too. Story 6. When Grandma insisted we follow her rules. My wife, Sarah, and I had been excited to host Thanksgiving at our house for the first time in years. After the last couple of chaotic holidays, travel delays, missed flights, and cramped hotel rooms, we wanted to create a calm, cozy space for our family to gather. That included Sarah's mother, my mother-in-law, Joyce. Joyce is the kind of person who likes things just so. She runs a tight ship. She's polite but firm, the kind of grandma who insists on her casserole recipe being followed exactly and doesn't hesitate to point out when the mashed potatoes aren't fluffy enough. From the moment she arrived, Joyce made her expectations clear. "No shortcuts in the kitchen," she said, inspecting our grocery bags like a general reviewing troops. "Everything must be on time. No exceptions." She handed us a strict schedule. 10 a.m., turkey goes in the oven. 11:30 a.m., stuffing preparation. 12 p.m., mashed potatoes start boiling. 1 p.m., guests arrive. Sarah and I exchanged glances but smiled. We wanted to make this holiday special, and if following her timeline was the price, so be it. On the morning of Thanksgiving, Joyce took charge. She measured ingredients precisely, chastised me gently for stirring the gravy wrong, and lectured Sarah on the proper way to peel potatoes. It was exhausting, but oddly comforting, like being in the hands of someone who cared fiercely, even if her style was a bit overbearing. The trouble began when Joyce insisted on a dry run of the entire meal 2 days before Thanksgiving. "We have to be perfect on the big day," she said, arms crossed. watching us attempt her complex recipes. We followed her instructions to the letter. The turkey was roasted for exactly 4 hours. The green bean casserole had precisely 1 cup of onions on top. No more, no less. And the mashed potatoes? Well, Joyce made sure they were fluffy enough, testing each batch with a wooden spoon. On Thanksgiving morning, everything was scheduled to the minute. At 10 a.m. sharp, the turkey went in. At 11:30, the stuffing was layered carefully inside, just as Joyce instructed. But then, at 11:45, the power went out. The whole neighborhood plunged into silence. The oven died, the stove was cold, and the kitchen timer stopped ticking. Joyce's face tightened with frustration, but she didn't say a word. Sarah and I scrambled to find candles and flashlights, trying to salvage the situation. Guests started arriving early, filling our house with anxious murmurs and polite smiles. But Joyce had a plan. She pulled out a battery-powered slow cooker from her bag. "We'll make the mashed potatoes in this," she declared, plugging it in. It was an old model, the kind you'd expect to find in a 1980s sitcom. We followed her orders carefully, chopping and boiling with the little cooker's limited capacity. It was slow going, but Joyce was relentless. "Remember," she said, "no shortcuts. We follow the rules." When the power finally came back on, 2 hours later, Joyce insisted we finish cooking everything according to the original schedule, despite the delays. That meant reheating the turkey, remaking the stuffing, and carefully refluffing the potatoes. Here's where the malicious compliance kicked in. We followed every step, every word, but we also added a little twist. Quietly, of course. For the turkey, we used the slow cooker to keep it warm after reheating, rather than the oven. The stuffing, we mixed in a little extra broth to keep it moist. Exactly 1 tablespoon more than the recipe specified. And the mashed potatoes? Well, we whipped them just enough to be fluffy, but not so much that they became gluey. Exactly what the recipe warned against. When the family finally sat down to eat, Joyce took her first bite and paused. Her eyes widened slightly. "That's different," she said carefully. We all held our breath. Then she smiled. "Not bad." By the end of the night, Joyce was laughing with the rest of us, telling stories about her own chaotic holiday disasters. She admitted that sometimes rules were made to keep things running smoothly, but that flexibility was just as important. That Thanksgiving taught us something important. Sometimes, the best way to honor traditions is with a little cleverness and a whole lot of love. Story 7. I still love my high school crush, even though I'm married. There's a secret I've kept hidden for years. I'm married. I love my husband. He's my partner, my best friend, and the person I chose to build a life with. But sometimes, in the quiet moments when no one is looking, my heart drifts back to someone else, someone from my past. His name is Jake. Jake and I grew up in the same small town. Our high school was the kind where everyone knew everyone. Friday night football games, pep rallies, and lazy summer afternoons spent under the shade of the old oak tree by the creek. Jake wasn't the star quarterback or the class president. He was quieter, the kind of guy who preferred a book to a crowd. But there was something about him, something magnetic, that made me want to know everything about him. His laugh was soft but genuine. His eyes held a kindness that I rarely saw anywhere else. We became friends over the years, study sessions at the library, late night talks about our dreams and fears, shared playlists passed back and forth. I never told anyone how much I liked him. It felt like a secret too fragile to say out loud. I imagined what it would be like to hold his hand, to tell him how I felt, to maybe even kiss him under that old oak tree. But life had other plans. After high school, we went our separate ways. Jake stayed in town, working at his dad's hardware store. I moved to college, where I met my husband, Mark. Mark was everything I could have hoped for: steady, loving, supportive. We built a life full of warmth, laughter, and shared dreams. And yet, every so often, Jake's memory would slip in like a quiet echo. Sometimes it's a song on the radio that reminds me of our shared playlists. Sometimes it's a phrase Mark says that Jake used to say too. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, when the house is silent and Mark is asleep beside me, my mind drifts back to those summer evenings by the creek. I've never acted on these feelings. I've never betrayed my husband. But the truth is, the feelings are still there. Soft, lingering, like a whisper I can't quite forget. I've thought about reaching out to Jake, just to see how he's doing. What if he still thinks about those days too? What if he remembers me the way I remember him? But I'm scared. Scared that opening that door might unravel everything I have now. Scared that it might hurt Mark. Scared that it might hurt me. I know it sounds complicated, and it is. It's hard to hold two pieces of your heart in different places and make peace with it. But I'm learning to accept that feelings don't always fit into neat boxes. That it's possible to love more than one person in different ways. To cherish the past while still living fully in the present. To hold space for complicated emotions without letting them control you. Some nights I lie awake and think about what might have been. Would life have been different if I told Jake how I felt? Would we have been happy together? Or would the distance between our dreams have pulled us apart anyway? Other nights, I reach out and take Mark's hand in the dark. And I remind myself that love is a choice, a daily commitment to the person beside me. That the life we've built together is real, and it's worth fighting for. Maybe one day, I'll find the courage to be honest with myself and with Mark about everything. Until then, I carry the secret quietly, a soft echo of a past that shaped me and a present I choose every day. Story 8. Quiet Justice, How I Took Back My Life from My Abusive Family. Growing up wasn't easy for me. My family wasn't the kind you'd imagine as loving or supportive. My parents were distant, often cold, and sometimes harsh beyond reason. Words like worthless, disappointment, and failure were constant refrains echoing through the walls of our house. My siblings? They either joined in with the judgment or pretended not to see what was happening. For years, I carried the weight of their disdain like a shadow that clung to me wherever I went. School was my escape. The halls and classrooms became a refuge where I could breathe, where I could be someone other than the broken version they wanted me to be. I threw myself into my studies, burying myself in books and quiet achievements. At home, the abuse was relentless, emotional, sometimes physical, always cutting deeper than the last. I felt trapped in a cycle I couldn't break, a constant battle between hope and despair. But one day, something shifted. I realized that I didn't have to live by their rules or accept their verdict on who I was. I could take back control of my life, piece by piece. So I decided to fight back, not with anger or confrontation, but with patience, with planning, and with a quiet strength they could never see coming. It started small. I saved every dollar I could from part-time jobs, working evenings and weekends, clipping coupons, and living frugally. Each dollar saved was a small victory, a quiet rebellion against the narrative they had imposed on me. I focused hard on my studies, determined to earn a scholarship and a way out. When they said I was irresponsible, I quietly proved them wrong by paying my bills on time and managing my finances carefully. Meanwhile, I watched and learned. I paid attention to their patterns, their weaknesses, and the ways they thought they controlled me. They never suspected that the quiet kid they dismissed was building a life they couldn't touch. I began to dismantle their power over me, carefully and deliberately. When they claimed I couldn't be trusted with money, I paid off some of their old debts anonymously, using the savings I had painstakingly built. When they mocked my dreams, I landed an internship at a well-respected company, keeping it a secret until I'd built enough momentum to move forward without their interference. When they tried to exclude me from family events, I invited close friends and mentors who uplifted me, people who reminded me of my worth and strength. Every step was a small act of defiance cloaked in kindness. I never shouted or confronted them directly. I simply stopped allowing their cruelty to define me. The final act of my quiet revenge came years later, and it was the most meaningful of all. I bought the house my family once owned, the one they boasted about endlessly, the house I had hated because it held so many painful memories. But instead of living there, I transformed it. I turned it into a community center, a safe space for kids and teens who, like me, needed refuge and hope. A place filled with warmth, support, and opportunities to dream beyond their circumstances. When my family heard about what I had done, they were stunned. Their words, once sharp and cutting, fell silent. And in that silence, I found freedom. Freedom from their judgment, their control, and their cruelty. Revenge doesn't always have to be loud or bitter. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge is reclaiming your life with quiet strength, with kindness, and with the knowledge that you are worth more than their cruelty. I'm telling this story now, not just as a confession, but as a reminder. No matter how dark the past, no matter how deep the wounds, you have the power to rewrite your story, to rise beyond the pain, to find your own quiet justice. Story 9. She cheated with almost everybody I know. I never imagined I'd be sharing a story like this, but here I am. My name's Tom. I'm 34, married to Lisa for almost 7 years. Or at least, that's what I thought. Lisa was my high school sweetheart. We grew up in the same small town, went to the same schools, shared friends, and countless memories. When we got married, I believed in us, in a future built on trust, love, and shared dreams. For the first few years, things were good. We had our ups and downs like any couple, but I trusted her completely. Lisa was my person. Then, about 2 years ago, things began to change. It started with little things, texts that went unanswered, her phone always on silent, sudden late nights at work. When I asked, she'd say she was stressed or tired, and I believed her. I wanted to believe her. But a feeling started to creep in, an uncomfortable, gnawing suspicion that something was wrong. I began to hear whispers from friends and acquaintances. She's been hanging out with Jason a lot lately, a coworker told me casually. I saw Lisa at that party last weekend. With Mark, said another. Then, more direct whispers. Did you know she's been seeing Kevin? Kevin was someone I'd known since college, a guy I trusted. I tried to push the thoughts away. I told myself these were just rumors, misunderstandings. But the stories kept coming. One afternoon, unable to hold it in anymore, I confronted Lisa. I asked her, plain and simple, if she was seeing other people. She didn't deny it. Instead, she looked down and said softly, "It's complicated. I'm not proud of it. But I've been lost." I don't know who I am anymore. The truth hit me harder than I could have imagined. She had cheated with almost everyone I knew. Friends from college, coworkers, even some family members. People I had trusted, people I thought were part of my world. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from beneath me. The woman I loved, the life I thought we shared, it all felt like a lie. I wrestled with anger and heartbreak. But more than that, I wanted to understand. Why? Why would she do this? Lisa told me she felt trapped by expectations, by the image of a perfect wife, a perfect life. She said she was confused, lost in who she wanted to be versus who she felt she should be. She admitted it was a mistake, but couldn't promise it wouldn't happen again. That shattered me even more. Because love, I realized, isn't always simple or easy. Sometimes it's messy. Sometimes it's painful. We started counseling. Every session peeled back layers of pain, confusion, and fear. We both had to confront our truths, the ones we'd been hiding, even from ourselves. Some days, I feel hope. Other days, I feel despair. But I'm learning that healing takes time. That forgiveness is a process, not a switch you flip. That rebuilding trust isn't about forgetting, but about choosing to move forward together, step by step. If you've ever felt betrayed or lost in love, know this. You're not alone. It's okay to feel broken. It's okay to ask hard questions. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is keep trying, even when the path ahead is uncertain. This story isn't about endings. It's about beginnings, of understanding, of growth, and of the complicated, imperfect journey that love often is. Story 10. The day my grumpy neighbor became family. When I first moved into the little house on Maple Street, I didn't know a single soul. It was my first home. Small, a little drafty in the winter, but it was mine. After years of saving and scrimping in my cramped apartment across town, I finally had a place where I could breathe. The neighborhood was quiet, with big maple trees that turned golden in the fall, and sidewalks lined with cracked bricks. Most of the houses were owned by families who had been there for decades. I was the newcomer, the outsider. And no one reminded me of that more than Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson lived next door. He was in his 70s, with silver hair that never seemed out of place, a face weathered from years of working outdoors, and the kind of frown that made you want to cross the street rather than say hello. When I first moved in, I'd wave at him from across the yard. He didn't wave back. "Good morning," I'd say, cheerfully on my way to work. No response. Just a quick glance and a muttered sound I couldn't quite make out. Sometimes I'd catch him peeking through his curtains as I struggled to carry boxes inside or mowed the lawn. For weeks, I told myself he just needed time to warm up. Then came the morning of the mailbox incident. I was running late for work, rushing as I backed my car out of the driveway. There was a loud crunch, and I slammed the brakes. When I got out, my stomach dropped. I'd backed right into the old wooden post that held up both our mailboxes. Mine wobbled precariously, but Mr. Thompson split clean in two, collapsing into the grass like a felled tree. I stood there, staring at the broken mailbox, my heart pounding. He was going to hate me even more now. I spent the entire day at work distracted, rehearsing apologies in my head. That evening, I gathered my courage and knocked on his door. No answer. I knocked again, a little louder this time. Finally, the door creaked open. Miss Thompson stood there, his piercing gray eyes locking onto mine like a hawk spotting its prey. "Yes," he said gruffly, "I'm so sorry about your mailbox," I blurted. "It was an accident. I'll fix it. I'll even buy you a new one. Whatever you want." He squinted at me, then sighed deeply like he'd been holding his breath for years. "Young people," he muttered, "always in a hurry." I braced myself for him to slam the door in my face. But instead, he surprised me. "Meet me tomorrow morning," he said. "We'll fix it together." The next day, at exactly 8 a.m., he was waiting in his driveway with a battered old toolbox and 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "Here," he said, handing me one of the mugs. "Thanks," I said, unsure of what else to say. We worked in silence at first. "Hold the post steady," he instructed. I held the splintered wood while he carefully measured, sawed, and hammered. His movements were slow but precise, the kind of deliberate work that comes from decades of experience. After a while, he started talking. "You know, I built this mailbox myself," he said, his voice softer now. "Margaret, that's my late wife, used to paint little flowers on it every spring, said it made the mail feel happier." He paused, staring at the ground for a long moment. "She's been gone 5 years now. The flowers faded." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. "I miss her," he added quietly, more to himself than to me. When we finished, the new post stood straight and sturdy. "Not bad for a beginner," he said with the faintest smile. For the first time, I saw a different side of Mr. Thompson, not the grumpy neighbor, but a man who'd loved deeply and lost just as deeply. Over the next few weeks, we started talking more. On Saturdays, he taught me how to prune the rose bushes in my front yard. "You're cutting too close," he'd say, gently guiding my hand. On rainy afternoons, I showed him how to use his new smartphone, patiently explaining how to send pictures to his grandchildren. "Why does this thing have so many buttons?" he'd grumble, but there was a twinkle in his eye. One weekend I baked cookies and brought them over. "They're a little burnt," I admitted sheepishly. He took a bite, chewed slowly, and said, "Needs more butter." But he ate 3 more. Anyway. Slowly, that quiet street stopped feeling so lonely. Mr. Thompson, the grumpy neighbor who never smiled, started waving at me when I came home from work. Sometimes, he'd be waiting on his porch with 2 mugs of tea and stories about his younger days, about how he built half the furniture in his house with his own hands. On my birthday, I came home to find a small package on my doorstep. Inside was a hand-carved wooden sign. It read, "Welcome home." At the bottom, in careful script, it said, "From your neighbor, Mr. Thompson." Sometimes, family isn't just the people you're born to. Sometimes, it's the people you meet by accident. The ones who slowly become a part of your life in the most unexpected ways. And sometimes, all it takes to turn a grumpy neighbor into family is a broken mailbox and a little kindness. If you're still awake, thank you for spending your time with us. We'd love to have you back tomorrow night, so go ahead and subscribe. Tap like if this video helped you unwind. And let us know in the comments what kind of stories help you fall asleep. Sleep well. See you in the next one. Sometimes it's the people you meet by accident, the ones who slowly become a part of your life in the most unexpected ways. And sometimes, all it takes to turn a grumpy neighbor into family is a broken mailbox and a little kindness. If you're still awake, thank you for spending your time with us. We'd love to have you back tomorrow night, so go ahead and subscribe. Tap like if this video helped you unwind. And let us know in the comments what kind of stories help you fall asleep. Sleep well. See you in the next one.